All right, mammals and reptiles and fish and birds and insects and anybody else who happens to be listening to this, hi, it's Brad again. I got another question on the emails that I thought was interesting, so I'm going to read it to you. I was wondering if you could expand on the following question however it makes sense to you. What is the importance of consistency in Buddhist morality? That is, exactly how flexible are things like the Eightfold Path and the precepts, or by extension, the variety of dictums laid out by later Buddhist teachers? I've seen some of your past videos that touched on this topic. However, I find myself again wondering if there is any hard line tethering a Buddhist person to any ethical principles that can't be wriggled out of through some mental maneuvering or moral hand-waving. Sorry, I had to read that several times before I got it right. I suspect part of my confusion is due to my own relationship to secular Western thought and its general historical demands for rigid consistency and universalization. The paradox being that it also demands room for adaptation and re-evaluation. I think Buddhism and Western philosophy are not dissimilar in this paradox. Yeah, I think so. And that's the deal. When he's asking about precepts that can be wriggled out of through, what did we say? Mental maneuvering or moral hand waving. The problem of what do you say? Let me read this. Consistency and universalization. That's kind of the problem. So let's talk about that. The way the precepts are given these days in the Zen tradition is that there are 10 grave precepts. Those are the ones people usually focus on, and then there's 6 others that aren't quite as grave. And the 10 grave precepts are, let's see if I never remember them, but I happen to bring a book. No killing, no stealing, no attaching to fulfillment. That's usually no misusing of sex. No illusory words, no selling of the wine of delusion, no dwelling on past mistakes, no praise or blame, no hoarding materials or teaching, no being angry, and no abusing the triple treasure. That's just one version of the 10 grave precepts in traditional Zen Buddhism. And what you'll notice about them is that they're mostly kind of vague and open-ended, and because they're vague and open-ended, they lend themselves to, what does he say, mental maneuvering and, what does he say, let's see, mental maneuvering or moral hand-wringing, or hand-waving, sorry. You could say that they lend themselves a lot to that. And one of the reasons they exist in the form that they do today is because of this. Back when there was still a Bodhi Tree bookstore in Los Angeles, which is one of the greatest losses Los Angeles has ever sustained, if you ask me, in terms of things that were here and things that are not. The Bodhi Tree bookstore was this very large bookstore that was dedicated initially, I think, to carrying books about Buddhism, but that generally sort of expanded to anything in any spiritual practice or anything like that. But it's basically books about spirituality of any kind, religion and all that stuff. And it was a great bookstore, like bigger than than your average Barnes and Nobles and stuff. So packed with things, and they always had these obscure books there, and I bought several. This happens to be a set of the complete Vinaya, which are the moral, ethical rules of early Buddhism, published in India, translated into English, and part 1, 2, and 3. I do not claim to have ever tried to go all the way through this set of books. I mean, it's a monster. But it is kind of interesting in that I would have initially thought it would just be a set of rules, 1, 2, 3, 4, because there were hundreds of rules in early Buddhism. But it's not. It does have a section of just a list of rules, and then has these stories and all kinds of other weird, interesting stuff in them. But the problem for the early Buddhists is, well, when the Buddha first decided to establish an order of contemplatives, let's call it that, meditators, he didn't really have a game plan. He didn't know exactly how it was going to go or what sort of thing he was going to do. So he didn't set up the rules of the team or whatever, the club, before he set up the club. He set up the club first, and then the rules started to be generated after things got big. I think when he initially had 5 students, they didn't really need to have rules. But then when it got to 10, 20, 30, 50, 100, 200, I don't know how many it was towards the end. But there were a lot of people involved in this and a lot of different opinions and a lot of different habits and so forth. So basically the rules were made up as they went along. If something happened, then the Buddha would be consulted about that, and he would make a kind of a ruling as the ultimate judge, arbiter of what was right and what was wrong. And then that would become one of the rules. Now, the documents we have now, I don't think it is fair to attribute all of them to the Buddha himself. I'm sure a lot of things were made up later. But my gosh, I can almost just open this book at random if I want and find something crazy in it. Let's see. Here's a good one. When a bhikkhu, that's a monk, is having a new bedstead or chair made, it should be made with legs 8 inches in height according to the accepted inch. So how long they, I'm sure they didn't use the word inch, but some equivalent. Exclusive of the lowermost piece of the bed frame. To him that exceeds that limit is a patikya. It's a offense. It's a sin to have a bed with the has to be exactly 8 inches for the legs. Should a bhikkhu have picked up either in a grove or in a dwelling place a jewel or anything deemed a jewel, it is to be laid aside that he to whom it may belong may take it away. This is the right course and such. That one sort of makes sense. Oh, here's a fun one. Not to a person wearing slippers, unless he is sick, will I preach the Dharma. This is a discipline that ought to be observed. And I myself am wearing slippers as I preach the Dharma, so I guess... Oops, knocked him off. So I guess I'm offending the rules of early Buddhism by doing that. There's all kinds of these. I remember coming across one that said you were allowed to run up a tree if an elephant was chasing you, which must have come up at some point. There's a whole bunch of ones about eating food. Let's see. With equal curry, will I eat the alms placed in my bowl? I guess you have to put enough curry on. I guess that means with equal relish, equal delight. Not until the ball of food is brought close will I open the door of my mouth. There's and so the point I'm trying to make by giving you all these arcane examples is that if you try to make rules that fit every case, well, you never can, because every case is a little bit different, and there's always some sort of exception. What my first teacher used to say, and he was a student of Kobun Chino Otogawa Roshi, whose book this is that the precepts are kind of koans. So let me read you what Kobun Chino had to say about the first precept, which is no killing life. And you wouldn't think you could get more basic than that one. I mean, it's also one of the 10 Commandments. Don't kill. Thou shalt not kill. But if you actually start thinking about that, you get into some crazy dilemmas. And I think Kobun makes a good point about this, so I'm just going to read what he says instead of telling you what I say, which is kind of the same thing anyway. When you say life, there are various lives you may see, but if you are looking at your own life, you feel what it is, but you can't explain it. You have to describe various events and what happened. So many times we say I, or mine, or me. There is something going on which makes it possible to say so. So when I pay attention to this I, it is always the true self in all attempts to express something. Even misspeech points to the truth. And then he goes on, imagine a very tough, strong, vigorous cowboy holding a gun in a showdown. The other cowboy misses his shot, and this cowboy now has another chance to control everything, but he is waiting to shoot. We see he can kill. What is going on in his mind? If he gets into a philosophical discussion with himself, he has lost his chance. If he throws away the gun, you see what is in his mind. He cannot kill. That is our true nature. Yet for survival, we have to take many lives, and we always get into this dilemma. Eating vegetables or fish is basically the same dilemma. What is it that is living? Precepts exist to cause a dilemma for us, and a deeper understanding of what this giving and taking of life is. And he kind of goes on from there, but you I think maybe get the point. I've been a vegetarian since before I became a Buddhist. It was a few months before I started getting interested in Buddhism that I finally decided to take the plunge and become a vegetarian. And back in them days, kids, we didn't have no such thing as a vegan. And the whole vegan thing kind of, I don't, maybe veganism existed, but I'd never heard of it back in those days. But the whole vegan thing was like, okay, you become a vegetarian because you have this moral idea that you're not going to kill animals to eat because it's not really necessary. Okay, well, what about the dairy industry, and what about the honey industry, and what about the various things that happen to animals in those industries? Okay, we're going to cut that out too. We'll become vegans. We won't have anything to do with any animals. Okay, well, what about the worms that are plowed under to grow the vegetables that you eat, and the blood that's used in the fertilizer to fertilize them? And it just goes on and on and on. And for my own part, if you want to know how I resolve that dilemma, I just decided, being vegetarian, I'm going to do as much as I can, and that's what I'm going to do. Because there's other considerations to think of. I travel a lot, and I'm fed by nice people who want to feed me. And I take it the way the early Buddhists did, only maybe modified a little bit, which is the Buddha said that they should basically be vegetarians, but if somebody puts meat in their bowl, they should eat the meat because it was given as a donation, unless they have reason to believe that the animal that they're eating was killed specifically for them to eat. Then they should, that's the only reason they should refuse it. That was the Buddha's rule. I just sort of modify that and say, well, I'll tell people I'm a vegetarian, but I'm not going to refuse to eat cheese and eggs because that's putting too much on the people who are hosting me when I travel. So on and so forth. There's a lot of stuff. I'm not trying to justify my being a vegetarian, but I'm just trying to give the example that these things are complicated. And that's the problem. One of the things that people get upset about, I think, when they talk about ethics is I remember hearing Christian friends of mine going, oh, that's situational ethics. Situational ethics, that's the worst thing in some people's minds. But I think all ethics are situational ethics, all of them. And so the criteria by which Buddhists are supposed to judge an ethical matter, the precepts, the Eightfold Path, and all of this, whether they are adhering to them or not, is the situation, an intuitive sense of what the situation calls for at that moment is how you judge the rules. So it's not that you look up the rules and go, well, I'm going to be consistent with these rules and tethered, as my person who asked the question put it, to these rules and not wriggle out of them. It's not so much a wriggling out of them as seeing what the situation actually involves and what is done. And each of us has to make that choice for ourselves in the moment that the choice needs to be made. So someone out there, I'm sure, is probably sitting around listening to my talk about why I'm a vegetarian and not a vegan, because I've met some vegans who are like this, and going, wow, he's wrong because, and so on and so forth. Well, okay, you can judge me that way. Maybe God is up there judging me that way. But the thing about Buddhists is we don't believe, most of us, in a God who sits there judging our action and going, here's right and here's wrong. It's the difference between sin and karma. So sin is interesting in that sin is the decision of the cosmic judge, and we don't understand what the cosmic judge's criteria are. We can just read it in a book and go, okay, that's his criteria, I better get it and better follow those rules. That's what a sin is. So if God decides that it's a sin to eat shellfish, then you're like, well, I don't understand why that's a sin, but you got to do it anyway. That's what you get in the concept of sin. The concept of karma is that you reap the results of the actions that you perform. And so by seeing the results of the actions that you perform, you gradually learn what actions are the ones you should take and what aren't. Observing that, though, is difficult, and that's one of the reasons we practice meditation. We practice it to get clear enough to actually have that intuitive sense available to us. And until the time that intuitive sense grows enough to become available to us, we have this set of rules called the precepts, and then we're supposed to follow those rules, and they give us kind of a basic framework for what to do. Does that make sense? I don't know if that made sense to you. It made sense to me. So remember that my podcast is back, and it would be nice if some of you listen to that. I am doing a new series about Dogen's, Busho, which is Buddha nature. And if you listen to the podcast, each episode is going to be about half an hour or 40 minutes long. Going in depth into that. So those are nice, and I've also been putting up new articles on my blog, which are now pieces from my book, The Zen of Godzilla, which I never finished, so I'm putting chapters of that on the blog. Those have never been seen before, so you can enjoy those. And as always, my income comes from your donations for the most part, and so I really appreciate you sending me those donations. You can go to the URL hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate, and you'll find links to my Patreon and PayPal. That is my only way of making a living, and I really appreciate your support, but I do offer these thingies for free, so you don't have to pay if you don't want to. I'm just saying there's where you can pay if you want to, and I do appreciate your support. So, thank you for watching. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Okay, Ziggy. Okay, you got that one, right? Okay, what about Ziggy? What about this one? Oh, you want that one. Okay. But Ziggy, wait a minute. What about this one? Ziggy. Oh, you gotta get that one. Wait a minute, Ziggy. You want this one? Wait. What about this one? Hey, Ziggy. Oh, no, how about this one? No, wait a minute. You got that one. How about this one? Okay. Yeah, but what about this one? And then there's this one. Oh, you finally figured it out. Okay, good.